Hello, my fair friends. I'm Ruby Ruse. This is Baby Bunny, and welcome to Fairy Fortunes. Today I want to talk about a very serious topic. Today's topic is the anatomy of a curse and how to remove one. This is going to be one of my longer videos because I'm actually going to be bringing to you 4 different parts in this video. So I will have timestamps down below so that you can move back and forth between each of the parts. So in part 1, I would like to talk about what a curse actually is. Then in part 2, we'll analyze the anatomy of a curse. Part 3 is going to be the removal, and part 4 is going to continue the removal process by talking about the very key to curse removal, which is identifying and removing the fuel source. So with that, let's jump right into part 1, what is a curse? So I do have a Lexico online dictionary definition for you of what a curse is, so let's go ahead and read that. A curse is a solemn utterance intended to invoke a supernatural power to inflict harm or punishment on someone or something. Now, I think that's a pretty good definition of what a curse is, but I am going to argue that putting a curse on something is actually a different type of magic altogether, and I really want to focus on curses, which I believe are a person-to-person form of magic. So just so to clarify, we are talking about when a person uses a supernatural power to inflict harm or punishment on another person. What I want to make very clear about curses in this video is that curses are the easiest form of magic to do. They do not require any type of magical practice or even skill. You don't even need to believe in magic to cast a curse. And here's why. I hate you is a curse. And let me be very, very clear about curses. They always work, and they will always land. So I would urge you to keep that in mind and use your words wisely, because I use the example of I hate you because that is an extremely effective curse that can cause a significant amount of damage. So how do you know that you've been cursed? Well, I hate you, as I said again, I'll say again, is a curse. So the most basic effect of a curse is that you're going to have a strong emotion that puts you off balance. So this might be the feeling of agitation. This might be confusion or fear. So if someone says, I hate you to you, you're going to have some kind of emotional response to that. And that is the power of a curse. However, in this video, I do want to talk about very powerful curses and how to remove them. So if the very basic effect of a minor curse is just that strong emotion that puts you off balance, what are some of the more powerful symptoms that you can feel? Well, with a stronger curse, that off-putting emotion that makes you feel unbalanced, that's going to lead to disorganized thoughts and distraction. At this stage of the curse, it's likely to be paired with some actual physical symptoms. So a person with this type of curse might have a headache, they would probably feel fatigued, there might be some dizziness. At this point, a little bit stronger curse would give you what I would describe as flu-like symptoms. A little more power to the curse, though, and it could bring on some very serious emotional depression. So at this stage, the victim of a curse, their thoughts, their actions, and sometimes even their beliefs can become completely out of character. And it's at this stage that the victim will likely experience nightmares related to the curse as well. So an even more powerful curse is going to take on a more external and existential quality to it. It's at this stage that the victim might feel that the world or the universe or even the gods has completely turned against them. They'll probably experience this feeling of uncanny bad luck, where it will feel like nothing is going right for them and nothing is going well. So an even more powerful curse will start to take on some physical manifestations. And it's at this point that modern technology will be affected. It's been my experience that modern technology is extremely susceptible to the energy of curses. Curses can cause irreparable damage to things like computers and cell phones. In fact, it's been my experience that those particular devices are extremely susceptible to the energy of curses. It's also at this stage that the victim is likely to experience things like traffic accidents or other types of physical accidents. They might find themselves being frequently injured by what seems like constant random freak accidents. And when it gets to this point, the growing power of this curse, the growing energy of this curse can actually start affecting people around the victim. So it can start affecting family, friends, even pets. And it's almost like this energy of the curse has like an airborne or contact virus ability to it. Now, before we move on, I just want to say that not everything is a curse. You have to be careful not to blame curses for everything that happens to you. If you have flu-like symptoms, you might just have the flu. If you have a headache, you might be dehydrated, or maybe you need glasses, or maybe you just need a painkiller. If you have nightmares, maybe it's because you're experiencing some overwhelm and stress that has nothing to do with a curse. You really do also need to look at your own behavior, because you really have to analyze, are you tired because you're cursed, or are you tired because you like to stay up until 2 a.m. in the morning? You have to consider, is your luck bad because you've been cursed, or is your luck bad because you're not contributing and reciprocating within the universe? And what I mean by that is, if you're the kind of person that cuts people off in traffic, you're going to have to expect you're going to get into a few accidents. So it may have nothing to do with the fact that you're cursed and everything to do with your own behavior. So now that we've looked at some of the symptoms, and when I talk about the symptoms, that alone, each point of symptoms can be just that type of curse. But definitely if you get to some of the most powerful curses, they have all of the symptoms that I've listed. So now let's move on to part 2, the anatomy of a curse. What is it that actually makes up a curse? What are the components of it? I think that there are 4 components to a curse. The first is focused hatred. Second, you need a sense of righteousness. Third is connection. And fourth is a fuel source. Now, the fuel source is actually so critical to, and is, I feel, the key to dismantling all curses, that we're actually going to take that and leave it for part 4 of this video. So we're just going to talk about the first 3 components right now in part 2. So I need to make very clear to you that magical ability and training have nothing to do with curses. They are an exceptionally easy form of magic. Even the most powerful of all curses are very, very easy to cast. Curses are about control. In fact, what they're really about is restoring control. Curses are about the balance of power, usually between two people, the person that threw the curse and the person receiving the curse. In order to demonstrate to you what I mean by these components, I think the best way to show that to you would be to explain it in terms of my own personal experience. So I would like to share with you two curses that I've had cast upon myself. One of the curses was done by an extremely skilled magical practitioner. I believe that this person sat down at an altar with an assortment of magical tools and very intentionally cast a curse on me. The second example of a curse that I have for you is one that I believe was entirely accidental. That was done by a person that had absolutely no magical training whatsoever. So one of the examples that I'm going to share with you was done by a former friend of mine. And the symptoms that I experienced with that particular curse from my former friend was that it started out with me feeling so sad that I just fell into an immediate depression. With this curse, my thoughts, I felt, were extremely disorganized. I mean, I didn't know what to do, and the really odd part of it was I felt really lost, like physically lost. And what was strange about that is when I had this feeling, I felt like I didn't even know where I was when another conscious part of my mind knew that I was actually in my own home, and yet I felt like I didn't know where I was. And then, as this curse was doing its work, I started to feel like maybe the world was better off without me in it. Because I believed that I was this complete and utter failure as a person. And then shortly after I had had that really disorientating thought, I was suddenly filled with this hysterical rage that seemed to like hit out of completely nowhere. And actually I began to scream. I was screaming hysterically. And what was weird about it is my voice to me didn't even sound like it was mine. It sounded to me actually like a man's voice. And I began to think that I was possessed. So that was the symptoms that I experienced with my former friend. The second curse that I wanted to share with you came to me from a former lover. So much like the other one that I described, this curse also began with this very deep and lingering sadness. And with this one, I felt so bad physically too. I was so tired. I wasn't even getting dressed in the morning, and I could barely feel like I could make it out of bed. I had a near constant headache, and I was dizzy and weak. And I felt like I really just couldn't even focus on anything at all around me. I was also having these terrible recurring nightmares that always included this image of me in a white wedding gown. And I was also feeling like I was a terrible mother. My son was very little at this time, and I had overslept several times during this period, and I had gotten him late to school. In addition to that, I had an accident with a computer that I had, and I had to go out and purchase another one, which at the time I didn't have a lot of money, and so that was a really big hardship. And what's interesting about that is that that second computer actually also malfunctioned and completely died. During the course of this curse, I ended up purchasing over 4 computers during this time. In addition to that, I had all of these numerous accidents just everywhere. I was constantly getting injured. Things were just breaking around me. It was awful. And one story that I can share with you too is that during this time that I was feeling the effects of the curse, I felt so bad that I had sent my son down the stairs of our home to watch television by himself because I just couldn't even get myself together enough to interact with him, and that was just so unlike me, so unlike me. And usually he would have been really thrilled to have the television all to himself and not be supervised and do whatever he thought he wanted to do down there. That would have been such a big treat when he was little like that. And he was happy at first and he was delighted, but then after a little bit he came crawling up the stairs to me, crying. And I went to him and I was holding him and I said, "Oh, what is wrong? What is wrong?" And he said, "I don't know what's wrong. I just feel so sad and I feel so bad." So, as you can imagine, that was a very struggled time that I was living through at that point. So now I want to pose the question to you. Remember that I said that one of these people was a very adept, very skilled magical practitioner that most likely sat down at an altar with magical tools and very intentionally cast this curse. And then the other person, this was probably an accident and had not intentionally sat down with a plan and magical tools to cast this. So I'm going to pose to you, which one of these two people, my former friend or my former lover, do you think was which? So now, leaving you with that question to ponder, let's move into part 3, the removal process. I cannot stress enough with you how easy curses are to cast. They are exceptionally powerful magical vehicles that do not take any magical training whatsoever to do. I hate you is actually a curse that everyone has cast. You have cast this curse at some point in your life. We all have done it. It is also one that every one of us has also survived at one point in our lives. So with that knowledge, I want to propose to you that curses are a great deal like viruses. A common cold, if you think about it, will make you feel really bad, sometimes even for weeks. But eventually, your own immune system is going to kick in and you are going to recover from that virus. Now, I have pointed out that everyone has been cursed at some point in their lives, and yet they probably didn't even know they were under a very powerful magical spell. Because they're easy to cast, but you can survive them. However, there are viruses in the world that are much more dangerous than others. And I would say that is also true of curses. Most curses you're going to be able to process out with your own bodily immune system, but some others are going to need some more care and some more help to get rid of. And that's what we're here for today. So to remove a more powerful curse that is troubling you, you first have to identify that you've been cursed, which can be a little more difficult than you might suppose. The next step of the removal process is that you need to consider the perpetrator. As I said, curses are about control. If someone has cursed you then, you have in some way made this person feel helpless. You don't always have to know specifically who cursed you in order to dismantle a curse, but if you do suspect more than one person, you just have to systematically address how you might have made each of those people feel helpless. Now, I just want to say that we're not saying that the person was justified in cursing you. That's something else entirely. But you do have to look at what you think made them feel helpless, because that is a component in removing a curse. The next step is then addressing each of those 4 components that I talked about earlier. The focused hatred, the righteousness, the connection, and the fuel source. But remember what I said is that fuel source is actually going to be in part 4, so you'll have to wait to hear about that. So how do you counter that focused hatred? Well, the way to counter focused hatred is to acknowledge the experience of the person who cursed you. So it's going back to, how did you make them feel helpless? Whether or not that was justifiable or not, it's important that you acknowledge the perpetrator's experience. To counter righteousness, you may need to make amends and or restitution. So in order to kind of explain what I mean about acknowledging experience and then making amends or restitution, let's talk instead, and let's put curses aside rather, and talk instead about a very simple action. Let's talk about stepping on a person's foot. So if you step on a person's foot and they say to you, "Hey, you stepped on my foot," the wrong thing to do in that situation is to say, "No, I didn't." Because when you say, "No, I didn't," you're completely dismissing the other person. You're denying their experience. So that's not to say that you need to take ownership of that if you really honestly don't think that you stepped on that person's foot. But in order to acknowledge their experience, you might say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that I did step on your foot. If I did, I'm sorry." You're not taking responsibility necessarily, but you are acknowledging their experience. A great deal of the time, by acknowledging somebody's experience, you can dismantle a curse just by that one action. Now, going back to stepping on a person's foot, if you step on a person's foot, acknowledging their experience and making that apology is usually all you need to do in that situation. But if you step on someone's foot and you break it, that's something else entirely. Now we have to move into making amends. So if you step on a person's foot and you break it, making amends would be making sure that that person gets proper medical care. So to make amends, you could call for an ambulance, or to make amends, you could take them to a doctor. That would be making amends. And once again, to dismantle a curse, a great deal of time, just the act of making amends might be enough. But there may need to be some additional restitution. So if you step on someone's foot and you break it, as I said, you may need to at least get them to medical professionals. But actually you might have to make restitution. And how you would make restitution in a scenario like that is paying for their medical bills. So acknowledging their feelings, "I'm sorry I stepped on your foot," that's acknowledging their experience. Making amends would be making sure they have proper medical care. And then restitution would be paying for that medical care. So I did actually have one person ask me about being cursed by a former spouse, and when I asked for more information about why they thought that and what was going on in the situation, the person confessed that they hadn't paid the child support. So here's the thing about curses. You may actually need to make restitution, and in that person's case, the act of paying the child support is probably what's going to break the curse. So when you have a curse, you will need to consider acknowledging the experience of the person who cursed you. You may have to make amends, and you may have to make restitution. But those acts alone sometimes are all you need to break a curse. But there are some more powerful curses, and we are going to talk about how to remove those as well. So now let's talk about that third component of connection. As I said, it is very possible to curse somebody by accident. So maybe it's important for you to keep connected to that person. For example, I can think of many situations where a toddler has inadvertently cursed their parent by saying, "I hate you." I don't think it would be appropriate in that circumstance to sever all connection with the toddler. Yes, that was a curse. Yes, it is a very powerful magical spell. But in that circumstance, that would be a very minor spell in most circumstances that would be very easy to mend and repair and move on from. So not all curses necessarily need to severely address the issue of connection. That said, you do need to be aware that curses are about focused hatred. In order to have a curse at all, a person must possess focused hatred towards you. And it is definitely, a curse is very much a personal experience. It is one person specifically cursing another person with very focused hatred. Now I want to make it very clear that hatred has nothing to do with anger. Anger is an emotion that has the power to create positive change. So think about it. If let's use the civil rights movement as an example of anger promoting positive change. We lived in a time where we didn't treat each other equally based on race. That was not right, and people got angry about it and rallied together and were able to use that anger to create positive change. That is anger. Hatred, however, is stagnant. Anger is about moving forward to something in the future, to something that is positive. It's going somewhere. Hatred is stagnant and is about destruction. So it is completely different. So what I want to propose to you is, if someone has so much focused hatred towards you that it landed a curse upon you, it may not be possible or advisable to keep connected to this person. So either way, you absolutely 100% have to deal with the connection that you have to the person that cursed you. That is an element of removing a curse. So, and I keep saying that the fuel source is even more problematic. It is the key to removing a curse. It is the absolute 100% key to removing most powerful curses. So fuel source is going to be talked about in part 4 of this video. So now I want to demonstrate the removal process with the 2 examples that I gave you earlier. With step 1, the identification process, when it came to my former friend, It was that thinking that I had been possessed and that this entity that had possessed me wanted me to hurt myself. That was the moment that I realized that I had been cursed. The reason being is that I do not believe in possession. I don't. That's a whole nother video. So we're not going to get into that belief right now. The only thing that's important to talk about is that that is a belief that I do not hold. So it was also, I realized that I had absolutely no desire of my own to hurt myself, because my independent belief that I hold is that my life, even with its challenges that I've had in the past, in my current, present, and even in my future, I still believe that even with all of those challenges that I have and will continue to have, that my life is absolutely worth living. So these thoughts concerning possession and self-harm, those were external from my own belief system, and that was the reason I knew that I had been cursed, because those two things had to come from somewhere else. They were not coming from me. So I show this because I want you to understand that you really have to pinpoint what it is that you think that's causing you to believe that you've been cursed. Because as I said, are you tired because you're cursed, or are you tired because you stay up until 2 o'clock in the morning? It's really important to identify what it is that makes you think you're being cursed. So step 2 in this case is the perpetrator. So when I realized that I had been cursed at this point, I realized that not only did this person who had cursed me hated me so much that they might actually want me dead. I knew that this was a person with the ability to take the power of suggestion way up to an extreme level. So I knew only one person that fit that criteria. And the other thing is that I had, when this curse hit me, I had earlier in that year decided to terminate a friendship with a person. And it was after this, and I had done that earlier in the year, but right before this curse happened, this person had made an incredible scene with some mutual friends of ours. I actually wasn't there to witness it, but it was just so shocking to everyone who did that I was informed about it by multiple people. So remember that I said is that you really have to acknowledge what made them feel helpless. And in this scenario, I believe that I had made him feel helpless because I had had the audacity to walk away from our relationship. And whatever my personal thoughts were on our relationship, I imagined at that point that he must have felt very dismissed and very ignored. And for whatever we might think about these people that curse us, it is important to acknowledge their experience. We don't necessarily have to agree with it, but it is important to acknowledge where they're coming from. So the next step, of course, is addressing those components that I talked about. And the first component that I want to talk about is actually connection. And in this case, with my former friend, is that he really didn't have it. We actually weren't friends. We just knew some of the same people, is really what was going on with us. So he really lacked a connection to me. Now, before I move on to some of the other components, I do want to spend just a moment on revenge. If you haven't ascertained by now, the question that I asked you earlier in the video, which curse do you think was done? Was it my former friend who was the adept magical practitioner, or was it my former lover? So the answer is that it was my former friend who was the adept magical practitioner. So he had very clearly, in my opinion, sat down at his altar, and he had gathered up his magical tools and with specific intention had cast a curse to me. And some people might believe that I had every justifiable reason to curse him back. But if I had done that, it would have been an act of revenge. And revenge is just another form of connection. Let me explain this. So as I said, this was a very adept magical practitioner, extremely skilled. He had just sent a wave of magical energy to me, and I had received it. If I had cursed him back, I would have sent a wave of magical energy right back to him, and now suddenly we have this current of magical energy now doing what? Connecting us. And if you want to break a curse, you have to break the connection. And revenge is connection. It will connect you. So revenge, when you're trying to remove a curse, will not work. It will actually make the curse stronger. So do be careful of revenge. And as I said with my former friend, we didn't really have a connection. So if I had cursed him back, if I had done an act of revenge against him, then we would have had connection. And that would have been problematic. So now let's go back to the components. Now let's talk about righteousness. So the situation with my former friend is the reason that I had ended our relationship is that we had yet had another fight in a long line of fights. But this particular one that ended our relationship got very, very ugly and very dirty. And to make matters even worse on that, this fight was over a very minor event that happened in my life and had absolutely nothing to do with him. Nothing. But this fight between us got very, very heated, and in that I just got so ashamed by my own behavior in it. I did not want to be this ugly and dirty, vicious person. I just did not want to be like that. It was not who I was. It was not who I wanted to be. And so I just stopped contributing to this truly ridiculous fight. And not only that, but I told my former friend, I told him that I respected him and he really didn't deserve that kind of behavior from me. I acknowledged my former friend's experience, and not only did I apologized to him publicly for my own behavior towards him. And I did not request or even expect apology from him. I only was concerned with my own behavior. Now, my acknowledgement of my former friend's experience and my apology for my own ugly behavior, that really should have been enough in that situation. There really wasn't any need for any amends or restitution here, because he had actually interjected himself into a conversation that I was having about a personal experience of my own that had nothing to do with him at all. So he had interjected himself into this situation. And it had nothing to do with him. So there was no need for amends, just me acknowledging that his experience and making that apology really should have been the end of the situation. Now, he was very willing to accept that my behavior had been shameful, but then he wanted to continue the fight. Rawr! And oh my goodness, he baited me with this horrifically vicious remark. It was really vicious. But I had already decided by that point that I did not want to contribute to that. I did not want to be an ugly, dirty, vicious being. And so I made the decision that I was not going to respond to that comment that he had made to me. And it was really this fight over nothing that made me realize that this type of engagement was the only interaction that the two of us had. And I decided that, well, I didn't decide, it was really the truth that he and I brought out the worst in each other. So I decided to release us, and I decided to end the relationship. I really didn't feel any desire to have any last word. I just let him go. I let him go to be whoever he chose to be without any interference or any argument from me. So in the case of my former friend, his righteousness was really, really weak here. If you think about it, is it righteous to cling to an unhealthy friendship that is already weak in connection? Like I said, we weren't really friends. We just knew some of the same people. And then is it righteous to want to attack and fight someone who really does not want to reciprocate, and even more than that, really doesn't wish you any ill will at all? Is that righteous? And here's the truth in that. Remember that I said in order to counter righteousness, you might need to make amends and restitution, but before that, maybe making that apology is all you need to do. I had already countered the magic of his righteousness because I had already extended an apology to him. So his righteousness had already been canceled out even before he launched his curse. So with the focused hatred, now this he had. Boy, he had it. But here's the thing. I really had to think about my former friend, and I thought to myself that I was looking back at all of the interactions that we had together and just how much animosity I really felt that he had towards me. And I was really trying to find out what I had done to him that had made him feel that way towards me. And I really came to think that maybe what the problem was is that I reminded him of someone else who had hurt him in the past. And that's the thing about focused hatred, is that sometimes the focused hatred has absolutely nothing to do with you. Focused hatred is also what fuels acts of terrorism. Focused hatred is what fuels acts of horrifically violent crime. Sometimes focused hatred isn't really about a particular person. A particular person just becomes the target for a very unhealthy person's rage. And here's the thing about that. Focused hatred is very powerful, but if there's not a fuel source there to power it, it doesn't really matter how skilled the magical practitioner is. It's just not going to last. So once I went through these steps, once I identified that I had been cursed, once I acknowledged the perpetrator, once I went through the components, this curse took me less than 5 minutes to remove. And I did it by simply saying this. Are you ready? This is how you remove a curse. Write this down, it's important. Ready? Here it is. This is what I said. You have no power over me. That is how you break a curse. But in addition to, you have to follow those steps. So remember that I had 2 examples to show you. So now I want to talk about the curse done on me by my former lover. So with my former lover, I should have known that I had been cursed with those reoccurring nightmares involving the white wedding gown. The reason for that is that I had been married, by the way. I was married in 1899. That's when I was last married. And this curse occurred in, I believe, 2009. So I think it's safe to say that if I had any interest independently in wedding gowns, of dreaming about them or wearing them, I might have done that sometime within the 21st century. So I should have known, because that definitely had nothing to do with me, that one. But it was actually when my son was swept away with all of that negative energy surrounding me that I really had to come to terms with the fact that I was suffering and was also passing this suffering on to my son. So with step 2, those wedding gown nightmares really narrowed it down to one particular person. So it really, I just knew that it had to be the former lover that I had just recently ended a relationship with back in 2009. And the truth of the matter is that I had made him feel helpless because I was the one that ended the relationship. I had made a choice, and it was very clear that that was not the choice that he would have made or one that he wanted. And like I said, it's not about whether the person is right or wrong. It's about looking at their perspective from a place of empathy. I made him feel helpless. Right or wrong, I did do that. And it is important to understand where the curse is coming from, because if you have that understanding, you can remove it. So then, of course, step 3 is addressing each of the components. So once again, I want to start with the connection, because connection is very powerful magic in and of itself. With my former lover, we had shared our bodies with one another, and that is a powerful act of connection right there. Sharing your body with someone is an act of magic. So even if you don't have any emotional connection to the person, it still is a very powerful mode of connection. So just keep that in mind. But in addition to that, I had also been very vulnerable with my former lover, and I had shared with him my secrets, my hopes, my dreams, and that strengthens, of course, connection. And then additionally, I had let him into my life by introducing him to my child. And that elevated his connection to me, because when you bring someone into your private circle, when you bring them into your circle of friends, or you bring them into your family, they are no longer an outsider. And that was the situation with him. By introducing him to my child, he was no longer an outsider. He had almost elevated to a position of family with that. Before I move on, I'm going to also disclose some more information about this particular person. This former lover of mine, in addition to all what I felt was a metaphysical curse, he was also stalking me And this stalking continued for over 2 years. I was getting constantly harassed. I had telephone calls all the time. He showed up to my family's home. It was very, very scary stuff. When it gets to that point, there's really no way that you can salvage any type of relationship with a person that is doing this. This is very, very dangerous stuff. And as I said, if somebody has focused hatred towards you, that is a person that is truly seeking your destruction. And definitely in the case of stalking, this is not a person that you can negotiate with. So for me, I really had to sever all connection to this person. That meant no contact by any means, period. And that may be what you have to do if you are experiencing a curse that goes as far as this one did for me. So when I say that I had to sever all connection, this really included enlisting the help of all my family and friends. Because he was stalking me, I unfortunately had to terminate some relationships with some mutual friends that we had. And the reason that I had to do that is that these friends were either purposely or inadvertently supplying him with information about me, my whereabouts, and other things about me. And in addition to that, there was even one person that he had enlisted the help of who was harassing me along with him. So in addition to him constantly trying to contact me and call me and showing up at my parents' home, this other person that was not a part of the situation was also doing this. So I was bombarded with harassment from not just one person, but from another person as well. And it was a very, very stressful and painful situation. Another thing that I need to relate to you is that this person had also given me a significant amount of gifts. And if you are under a very powerful curse, I have this to say to you. Gifts are the currency of connection. Connection in and of itself is magic, and gifts are the currency of that magic. If you think about it, in order to make a manifestation of our commitment to a connection, we exchange gifts with one another. A gift is a physical item that shows your commitment to connection. It can take on a very nefarious element, though, too, because sometimes people try to use gifts as a way to buy that connection. So if you are under a powerful magical curse, whether, like I said, whether or not this person has any form of magical ability or not, it makes no difference. This is powerful magic. Remember that this former lover of mine had no magical ability at all. Gifts from a person who cursed you act like magical homing devices. So I urge you to get rid of them, period. You must sever the connection. So with that, let's move on now to focused hatred. That he had. Because he was completely enraged that I had ended our relationship. Now, as I said, my former friend, the very adept magical practitioner, that took me 5 minutes to identify and eradicate. This curse from my former lover took 5 years to finally get rid of. And remember that I said that I was saving the fuel source for part 4. The reason being is that the fuel source is truly the key to curses. The fuel source is what's going to take them from a very minor flu-like curse to a curse that can affect your own children and your family and your friends. It is the fuel source that gives it that power. I really cannot stress enough that it is not the skill of the person casting the curse that really matters. And here we are in part 4 talking about the fuel source, because it is the fuel source that gives a curse its power. And here's the truth. The fuel source is provided by the victim, not by the caster. The fuel source comes in the form of intense emotions and investment to the situation regarding the curse and or the person who cast it. So let me try to articulate this concept by using my own 2 examples. With my former friend, this very adept, very skilled magical practitioner, who had sat down at an altar with an assortment of magical tools, with a very specific magical intention, and very intentionally launched this curse at me. There was not a fuel source. So yes, remember I said all curses will land. It did land. But it did not last. Because I did not have any intense emotion of any kind regarding him or the fight that we had had or the scene that he created with our mutual friends. I did not feel guilty because I had already apologized for the fight that we had had earlier in the year of when this occurred. I didn't feel sad because this wasn't a friendship. The 2 of us brought out the worst in each other, and that was not a way to be. And you know what? I didn't even feel joyous about ending the relationship because I wasn't in any way invested in the fight that we had had or even in our relationship. We just weren't meant to be. That was just my opinion of the situation. It just was what it was. If I felt anything at all, it was relief. Because now, with me ending the relationship, we were now both free to be whoever we were and not who we wanted the other person to be for us. Before I move on, I just want to make a note of professionals. I have had some people tell me that they can remove curses. I've heard of people that will take money in order to remove a curse for you. They will say, if you pay me this, I can remove this curse that you have on you. I am here to tell you right now that these are scam artists and charlatans. It cannot be done, period. They are lying to you. Anyone who says, if you pay me this amount of money, I will remove this curse, is a fraud. period. They are scamming you and lying to you because it cannot be done. It can't. Now, let's go back to the virus analogy that I mentioned earlier. Most curses, we've all been cursed at one point or another in our lives. We all have. And not only have we all been cursed, we have all cursed somebody in our lives. That's just a given. You probably didn't even know you were cursed. You survived it. Your body took care of it. And you survived. And you moved forward. However, like I said, there are viruses that are more dangerous than others. So obviously, when you have a dangerous virus, you go to see a medical professional who can help to treat you. But that's the thing. They help to treat you. They say to you, you need to do these things and you need to take these medications. But ultimately, it is your responsibility whether you do those medications and suggestions or whether you do not. The person that actually accomplishes the healing is you. No one else can suddenly heal you, period. So there is no way a magical practitioner, no matter how skilled they are, can get to the fuel source that you are providing for the curse. You have to address your own intense emotions that are fueling that curse. The only person that can remove it is you. Now, that I'm not saying that you can't go to a magical professional to help you. A magical practitioner would be able to address some of the symptoms. They might be able to suggest some things that would reduce the ability of the curse to affect others around you. They may be able to give you some suggestions on how to lessen the nightmares. They may be able to give you some charms and talismans that would help you feel protected. But if you do not address what you are contributing, what is causing the fuel source, the curse will persist. Period. Done. So I think the fuel source is best described if I go on and talk about the fuel source that I created with my former lover and why that curse that was done accidentally by a person with no magical ability, why that became such a dangerous problem for me. With my former lover, the reality was that I provided an immense fuel source for him. Breakups, romantic breakups especially, are always painful. They are always sad. And a lot of times the person that does the breaking off feels very guilty. And I felt guilty. Guilt is a very strong emotion and a very effective one to power curses. But that would have been enough to strengthen the curse, but I had a lot more power to fuel it with. So in addition to the sadness, in addition to the serious guilt that I was feeling, here was the reality of the situation. Early on in my relationship with this person, I had observed several red flags that this was not a person that was healthy enough for a romantic relationship. I saw the signs, and I chose to ignore them. And in addition to that, remember that I had brought him into my child's life. The truth of the situation is that I really did not want to do that. I did not want to do that. I did not want to involve my romantic life and my home life. I did not want those two lives to intersect. But he had pressed the issue, and I had acquiesced. I had let him violate a boundary of mine. And did you hear me right there? I let him do that. Self-blame. Self-blame is an exceptional, rich power source for curses. And the reality is that, did I deserve to be stalked? Absolutely not. No one deserves to be stalked. No one actually, I think, deserves to be cursed, really. Nobody deserves that. But the reality is that while we may not deserve the circumstances that happen after the fact, it is somewhat our own actions that cause it. I had, in fact, ignored the red flags. I saw them, I knew that it was dangerous, and I proceeded anyway. I allowed him to violate a very significant boundary of mine. I made that choice. No one made that choice for me. I did that all on my own. So while it may not be completely effective to self-blame, what is important in a curse situation is that you really have to identify your contribution to the problem and understand what made you do that. So I had to look at my behavior and ask myself why. I knew those signs were bad. I knew those were red flags. I knew he was emotionally unstable. So what caused me to proceed anyway? Why did I do that? I allowed him to violate a very significant boundary that I had for myself. Why did I do that? I needed to come to a place of understanding of my own behavior. Now, when I said that professionals, be very wary of professionals, these professional magical practitioners that say, if you pay me this amount of money, I can remove this curse for you, they are lying to you. But there is one professional that may be able to help you unravel the reasons behind your behaviors, and they are called licensed clinical therapists. The reality that the professional that you may actually need to remove a curse is someone from the mundane world, and that's the reality. Not always, but for these very powerful curses, you must unravel the reasons behind your own behaviors. And a lot of times it takes a professional to help you do that. So, licensed clinical therapist, not a magical practitioner, licensed clinical therapist. I hope I have demonstrated to you in this video that you do not in any way need to have any type of magical skill or ability in order to be able to cast a curse. I hope I have made it clear that casting a curse is one of the easiest forms of magic to do. But with that token, I also hope that I have shown you that you also do not need any special kind of magical training or ability to be able to remove one. However, depending on the curse, that may not be a very easy thing to do. You may have to give an apology. You may have to make amends. You may have to provide restitution. More than that, you have to do the very difficult work of self-reflection. And I want to reiterate again that everyone has in their lives at some point been the victim of a curse. You can survive them. You don't need anything special other than your own strong will and immune system. You will survive them. You hold the power, and no one can hold dominion over you if you do not allow it. You are capable of greatness. Never forget that. And with that, have a fairyful day.